My guest today is Todd Cameron, and we're talking about ScaleMyClinic.com. Now, Todd knows a lot about scaling, and we'll ask him questions to learn more about what it means to him. He's a general practice expert business coach, and obviously he'll clarify what exactly that means. Todd, it's great to have you. What is that biggest problem you solve?
Yeah, I think one of the problems that is relevant in all small businesses. When we start a business, we start it because we identify a problem that needs to be solved, and we think we have the solution to it. And so, typically, what happens in general practices, and we only work with privately held general practices in Australia. What happens is the community gets what they need, so there's an impact in the community, and often, the employees in the practice get what they need. The other doctors are usually there on a contractor basis. They get what they need. But typically what happens is the owner is working for a lesser return than what they would have if they were just a contractor in another practice. So they just don't actually get a financial return for the time, energy, money, and sacrifice that they put into the business. And that's what we're there to solve.
Yeah, so it starts with this feeling that they're working hard, but they appear not to get enough rewards from it. Is that where it starts?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Now, why did you start your specific brand, your business, Scale My Clinic? So what was the biggest challenge? What was missing in the landscape?
Yeah, I think the reality is it was a deeply personal experience for me. I had gone through this, and I had sought mentors and coaches and people that had gone before me. And the challenge in medicine is, you by definition, owners are lifelong learners. Most of them are doctors. Sort of 8 or 9 out of 10 of those privately held practices will be owned by GPs themselves. And they're lifelong learners, but they're not really into collaborative learning. When you're at university, you're competing against the people beside you. And so there isn't really a place where you can go for this type of help. And so because it didn't exist, my motivation was to team up with somebody. Sachin Patel was the GP that I teamed up with, was to team up with somebody and actually provide what was missing, we believed, in the marketplace.
Yeah. Now, because you didn't have Scale My Clinic available when you were scaling, did this cause many painful learning moments for you?
Yeah, so as a youngster, my experience is a bit different to most. My father was in insurance, and so that meant that I grew up with a bunch of books by Zig Ziglar and Brian Tracy and all of these kind of people from that era. And I remember just reading these books. I didn't really have a place to put the knowledge, or a place to put the actions that resulted from the knowledge, but it all kind of went in. And then when the time came for me to actually set up my own practice, which I did in 2003, was the first one that I opened. All of that knowledge came to the fore, and I wasn't really aware what I was learning it for at the time. It was just that it was around. My dad was learning it, so if it was interesting to him, it was interesting to me, was my approach.
Yeah. So you started with one practice, you scaled. Where are you at now?
Actually, I grew it to a larger number of clinics, then sold those off in 2016. There was an opportunity myself, and I had 2 co-owners, an accountant and an investment banker. We were approached by an organisation that was setting up an ASX-listed entity, and the 2 largest practices from what was then Modern Medical became part of that ASX-listed entity. It was initially BGD, which is an old shell of a mining company. That became Zenitas, and between 2016 and 2018, it grew from the revenues of those 2 practices that we vended into it, which was about $8 million, thereabouts, maybe $9 million, to a business that had about $170 million of revenue, and it was taken private in 2018. I was a director of that business, that ASX-listed entity, from beginning to end, and after that was finished, that stage of my life, then I went on to set up Scale My Clinic with Sachin.
Yeah. Now, that particular story of scaling and then evolving into an exit strategy, is that one of the key drivers when general practice owners start working with you? Do they want to work towards this exit strategy?
It's a really good question. I think the reality is that if you're building your business robustly, you're building it so that it can be owned by somebody else, but it doesn't have to be. But what that does is give you flexibility, because if you've built it to sell, that if the opportunity comes along and it's the right price and the right time for you and your team, then you can pull the trigger on that. But it may be that that's not the case, and owning that asset for a longer period of time. Of course, we all end up transitioning away from asset ownership through whichever means that occurs, but it always occurs.
Yeah. So, what are some of the other key drivers that are involved when you start working on this concept called scaling? What are the key drivers there?
Yeah, so I think technology is obviously a key platform of scaling. So you need to make sure that you have scalable systems in place, and that means a lot of different things. But some of it is technology, some of it is about using distributed teams. And we're now in a circumstance. So I think the pandemic has accelerated adoption of global teams. So Zoom meetings aren't unusual or different to people. You should be able to use asynchronous comms platforms internally. There are quite a few that you can use. We use Slack, and we really like that as a tool. And then it really is about the way that we engage other services. Whether you use fractional expertise. There are a lot of ways of actually building your business such that it's able to be scaled, where the costs increases are incremental based on the size of the business.
Now, when I speak to practice owners, whether there are general practitioners or specialist doctors or allied health, a recurring feeling of pain that I hear about is scaling their team. So scaling a team seems to be a big problem. Is that also a reality in your programs?
Yeah, absolutely. And what we most commonly find is that the leaders are the bottleneck, and that occurs for a variety of reasons. When you've got doctors as owners, they're typically quite intelligent people. And so, they can often feel like they're the best persons to do things, which may be true, but the reality is it's non-scalable if it's you that's doing everything. So, if you can delegate something to somebody that does it 70% as well as you, that can be a frustration point for people, and they sometimes take it back and say, well, it's not being done to the standard I'd like, or the volume is not to the standard I'd like. But once you get 2 or 3 or 4 people doing it at that standard, then you cannot beat being 140%, 210% of your own output. And so that the key part is that first bit of delegation and growth, and then just becoming an expert at delegating and understanding the processes around that. So you are no longer the roadblock for growth.
Yeah, that's a word that resonates with some of the experiences I got talking to doctors. Now, you use some really interesting vocabulary there. What we saw online is you mentioning recruitment often being seen as serial monogamy, where it should be a funnel. So let's just break that down a little bit. When you call it serial monogamy in recruitment, what does that mean?
Yeah, it means that you are loyal to the person that you are interviewing for a position. So you begin at A, you get to B, move to C, and then you find out they're not a match, and you go back to A and you start again with the next person. And that's something that's really common because as clinicians, again, we are very loyal to the individual. So, that's part of the way that we work in the practice. But the truth is that recruitment is actually a marketing problem. It's not really this problem of following things through to the end. So we need to have a range of choices, and it really is a funnel. We need to make sure we have the right activity at the top of funnel, and then people have a very clear next step until you end up with choice about who it is that you work with. And if you're not rejecting people in recruitment, then you're not doing a good enough job. You're not accessing a broad enough audience.
Yeah, I'm sure when people would sign up for your programs, they would learn much more about this in detail. So tell us a bit more about that signature program, Project X. What exactly is it?
Yeah, so it's a place where we give, it's group coaching firstly, and that is often a foreign concept. As I said, people typically work alone, although they might be in a group environment in terms of their academic experience. So group coaching is really useful because one of my favorite sayings there is none of us is smarter than all of us. And, you might operate a practice that's in Perth, and the clinic in Australia that is most like you may well be in Tasmania, just because of the avatars that you serve and the type of practice, the size and the philosophy that you have. So having a really diverse group of people around you helps a lot, because ideally you're facing somebody that has faced a challenge just before you have, so that the context is just right for them. So we give people the plan, the tools and the help so that they can actually grow their businesses. And we do that through regular webinars and events as well.
Yeah. What would be the typical top 1, 2, or 3 learnings that your customers take away from working with you?
Yeah. One of the key things is clarity, role clarity in the team. So often what happens is you've got a lot of people that are enthusiastically working, but they lack clarity and they don't have appropriate leadership management, and their own responsibilities around dashboards. So the accountability may be lacking in that team, and also knowing where to go to pick up the easy money. A lot of businesses have opportunities whereby the effort that's required is relatively straightforward to go and pick up some extra opportunity there. And we always say the foundation of work in healthcare is great clinical care, so that needs to be the foundation. But beyond that, there are opportunities that you can earn a good living from it as well as a business.
You've created a lot of clarity for our viewers and readers today. Thank you for that, Todd. ScaleMyClinic.com will link back to you. Thank you so much for your time today, and hope to speak to you again very soon.
Thanks for having me on.